So I saw a thread about the creepiest things you've ever done, but it got me thinking, what's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Story 1. I was 13 at the time. It was late at night, and I have always had a wild imagination. My old bedroom faces the door at the top of our stairs and into our parents' bedroom. One night, my mom was at work and my dad was visiting my grandmother, so I was in my room listening to the Backstreet Boys or something and heard someone coming up the stairs. We don't lock our doors in our neighborhood. When I looked, it was my dad in his usual PJs. I said goodnight, but he never faced me, just went into the bedroom and that was it. I went back to whatever I was doing. Half an hour later, I heard someone else coming up the stairs, and when I looked, it was my dad, fully clothed, wearing his jacket. He asked me how my night went, and I just went pale. To this day, we cannot figure out what happened. He checked the house, and no one was there. But our house has been known for being haunted, if you believe in that. We've had several people leave our house because it just didn't feel right, and some out-of-ordinary things have happened that can only be explained with far-fetched reasoning. I never stayed in my house by myself after that. Story 2. My girlfriend is a sleepwalker. It only really comes on when she's incredibly exhausted or stressed out. We had just come back from Tokyo, first night back in our bed. I got up to take a leak, and when I turned around, she was standing in the door, eyes semi-open but glazed over, face slack. She surprised me, but I thought she just needed to use the bathroom. But she just stood there and wouldn't let me pass until I spoke to her.
Hey, we have to get out of here. They're coming for us.
The hairs on my neck immediately stood up. The way she said it was so cold and mechanical, it was like it wasn't even her voice. That's when I realized she was sleepwalking. Go back to bed.
Okay.
And she spun around and shuffled off to bed. I know it doesn't sound like much, but it was so creepy. It's like she was possessed. I didn't even get back in the bed with her. I went into the living room and slept on the couch. Story 3. A few years ago, a show ran called Crime Investigation Australia, which was a surprisingly well-made series about famous Australian killers in the process of bringing them to justice. I got really into it and spent a lot of time ruminating about how horrible it would be to be kidnapped and murdered, knowing you were powerless to stop it because they had tied you up or something. Well, cut to me waking up in a daze, completely disoriented with no idea where I was. I look around and I'm in a blank white box with no doors or windows. Sound starts to filter into my head and I realize I can hear a roaring car engine. The car takes a turn and I slam into the wall of the box. It hits me. I'm being kidnapped. I start pounding on the walls and screaming for help. After less than a minute, the car grinds to a halt and I hear footsteps moving along the side of the vehicle. A camouflaged door opens and a policewoman is standing there with a stern look on her face. Turns out, I blacked out at an end-of-studies exam party and passed out on the sidewalk before I got home. Two lovely policewomen stuck me in a paddy wagon and spent the next hour driving me around trying to find my house. My ID said I lived in a dorm, but I'd moved off 6 months earlier and the RAs had no idea of my new address. My kidnapping was just me coming to in the back of the paddy wagon. In the end, they got through to one of my friends on the phone, one of the few who weren't too shit-faced to say my address, and dropped me back at my place. Considering it would have saved them masses of time and hassle just to throw me in the drunk tank overnight, I was hugely grateful and sent their station a very sincere thank you letter. Story 4. I was 9 at the time, sitting in my parents' car at a parking lot of Kmart. Me being my inquisitive self, I would look around the lot at other cars and the goings and comings. Soon enough, a red pickup truck pulled up beside me with a quite disheveled-looking man sitting behind the wheel. I just stared at him because he had a look of great sadness within his eyes. He stared blankly at the dash for a while. After some time, he starts yelling and then breaks down into tears. Immediately after breaking into tears, he reaches into the glove compartment and pulls out a pistol. He checks the magazine and points it to the roof of his mouth and starts screaming names. The names of his kids, I guess. He does this for a few more minutes until he realizes a 9-year-old boy is staring lockjawed at him. He just stares at me with the gun in his lap and then smiles and blows me a kiss. He left sometime after the staring contest. My dad came back from the store and asked why I looked so pale. I didn't say a word until we got home and I immediately vomited into the toilet, feeling so nervous about the entire thing. Story 5. I live in an apartment with my mom. One day I came home later than she did. I'm in college, so I did what I usually do. Close the door, throw my stuff on the floor, and get something to eat. I didn't even think about locking the door. The night goes on and both my mom and I go to bed. I must have dozed off around midnight or a bit earlier, and it's worth mentioning that I fell into a pretty deep sleep. A little background worth mentioning. There are times when my mom leaves something of hers in my room and she has to try to get it in the morning before she leaves while I'm still asleep. She usually does so very quietly, but I can always kind of feel that she is there. Back to the story. So I'm having a good sleep when all of a sudden I feel light shuffling around my bed. This didn't really wake me up, but I guess it woke up my unconscious because I told myself that it was most likely my mom. I keep hearing this sound when all of a sudden there's a loud bang next to my bed. I happen to be laying face down, so I peek my head up and look down, expecting to see my mom on the floor because she tripped over the clutter around my room. Expecting to get yelled at in Spanish since my family's Hispanic, I prepare myself for the deep shit I'm about to be in, when all of a sudden I start hearing Chinese, Japanese, Korean. I had no idea what the fuck was going on, so this really woke me up. As I woke up, I realized a couple of things immediately. It was too early for this to be my mom. My door was wide open, which my mom never does, and there was a little shadowy figure on the floor. When I heard this language, I panicked and jumped off my bed and just started screaming at the top of my lungs. The shadowy figure started getting up in the creepiest way possible, like the girl from The Ring. At this point, the figure was in between me and my door/light switch. Out of fear, I started yelling to turn on the lights. I had no idea what I was doing, but the figure for some reason listened and slowly walked to my light switch. I swear, this part is straight out of a movie. The dark figure turns on the light for a second, looks at me in the eyes, and then turns it back off. I see that it was an old Korean lady. She turned off the lights and started to reach for her dentures, which had fallen when she tripped over my mess. At this point, I was sure I was dead. My heart was pounding and I was screaming at the top of my lungs at 4 a.m. As she put her dentures back in, I managed to drive her out into the hallway with my screaming. My mom came out of her room asking what the hell I was doing. She assumed I was drunk or that a friend of mine was. She couldn't see the ladies, so I stepped aside to let her see, and my mom's jaw dropped. We eventually got the lady outside. Turned out she was some lady with Alzheimer's disease who got locked out of her house and found our door to be open. I almost threw up later in the night because I kept thinking that at some point she was watching me sleep. That was the creepiest thing I've ever heard happen. Story 6. AOL chat room when I was 15, some douche starts douching, insulting everyone. I found cyber fights entertaining back then, so I go with it. After the while, he tells me my address, full name, and a link with a picture of me from my old school's website that I didn't even know about, and said he's going to kill me. I machoed up saying bring it, and slept with a weapon handy, and still do. He never showed up as far as I know, and I'm pretty sure I'm still alive. Story 7. I've had a few creepy things happen, but this one sticks out for some reason. I broke into an abandoned trailer in the woods when I was a kid with a couple friends. We never saw any cars in the driveway or signs of people living there. There were warning signs everywhere and a bunch of papers on the door saying it was protected and the consequences of being caught breaking in, etc., etc. After breaking through the boarded up windows, we found a bunch of guns, stuffed animals, and pictures with only the same little kid in them. That trailer is still there.